A brittle December wind curled through the grand halls of Ravencourt Manor, carrying with it the copper-tinged scent of unease. Snow pressed silently against stained glass windows, muting the world outside into a white void. At the foot of the estate's sweeping scarlet-carpeted staircase, a man's body lay twisted, elegant evening attire now dishevelled in death. Gasps echoed from horrified guests gathered for the winter gala, and as panic bloomed, a single figure stepped forward, moustaches immaculately arranged, eyes sharp as cut crystal. Chapter 1. The fall at Ravencourt Snow fell in delicate, whispering spirals over Ravencourt Manor, settling upon its gabled roof like a silvery crown. The estate loomed across the wintry countryside, its stone façade gleaming faintly beneath lanterns encased in wrought iron filigree. On this December night, the manor was alive with festivities. Warm lights flickered behind tall windows, inviting distinguished guests into its halls for the annual Ravencourt Winter Gala. Yet, even in celebration, the manor possessed an unsettling grandeur. Its corridors were long, its staircases sweeping and excessively ornate, and its walls lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow passers-by. There lingered about the place a hush, as though the very stones remembered old tragedies. Inside the entrance hall, the gala moved in elegant currents. Champagne glasses chimed. The orchestra's violins sighed softly. Pearls glittered against velvet gowns, and the air shimmered with candlelight and perfume. The scarlet-carpeted staircase rose from the centre like a regal spine, twisting upward in two grand curves that met at a wide landing. It was here, upon these very stairs stained the colour of wine, that the evening's splendour shattered. A sudden scream ripped through the music. Gasps followed. The orchestra faltered into horrified silence. A man had fallen, or been thrown. His body crashed down the final steps of the scarlet staircase, limbs twisted in dreadful angles, the snap of bone chillingly audible even through the gasp of the crowd. Women shrieked. Men stood frozen. The guests gathered around the unmoving form dressed in formal evening attire. A distinguished man with greying hair, a finely trimmed beard, and an expression contorted in a final moment of terror. "Dear God," someone murmured. Servants rushed to the scene but halted as soon as they recognized the victim. "It's Sir Alistair," whispered Lady Eveline Morningside, her gloved hands trembling. Sir Alistair Morningside, renowned financier and owner of Ravencourt, lay broken upon the plush crimson carpet he had once so proudly installed. Blood seeped in a thin trickle from behind his ear, mingling with the deep red of the staircase. One hand reached upward, fingers splayed, as though attempting to grasp something that had vanished. The crowd shifted uneasily. No one dared approach too closely. The elegance of the gala had evaporated, replaced instead by a suffocating dread. A voice spoke through the murmuring panic, calm, resonant, and unmistakably foreign. "Mes amis, step back if you please. You stand upon the footprints of truth." The crowd parted instinctively, as though granting space to royalty. There he stood, a compact figure of immaculate composition, every detail of his attire arranged with mathematical precision. His moustaches gleamed like polished silver scimitars. His suit was perfectly pressed. His potent leather shoes reflected the chandelier's glow. Hercule Poirot had arrived. He had been invited to the gala by Sir Alistair himself, though the invitation had arrived late, almost suspiciously so, and couched in flowery language as though concealing unease. Yet Poirot had accepted, curious as ever, and had arrived hours earlier, taking time to observe the manor's architecture and the curious nervous energy among its staff. Now, seeing the corpse, he merely inclined his head. "Alas," he said softly, "my host proves most inhospitable in his welcome." Inspector Bradbury, a heavy-set man with bristling mutton chops, pushed through the crowd. "Poirot, you again?" he muttered, though with no true malice. "I suppose you'll want to touch nothing and examine everything." Poirot lifted a hand dramatically. "Touch? Non, mon ami. One must never disturb the sacred geometry of a crime scene. To do so is to sweep away the whispers that speak to the little grey cells." Bradbury huffed. Yes, your cells. Very well. What do you make of it?" Poirot's eyes drifted over the scene, studying with near-hypnotic focus. The staircase, the landing above, the cracked balustrade railing, splintered, not broken by a fall, but perhaps loosened beforehand. The thin smear of crimson higher up, hidden from easy viewing. The angle of Sir Alister's limbs, improper for a simple tumble. The faint indentation on his shoulder, subtle but telling. The hand raised toward the air, as though reaching at the last moment toward his killer. Poirot crouched slightly. Not enough to disturb the scene, but enough to let his gaze sweep like a spotlight. "No," he whispered, "this was no accident." A small cluster of individuals hovered closest to the body, 3 figures whose proximity made them immediate persons of interest. Poirot surveyed each with precision. Lady Eveline Morningside, draped in a gown of black satin with a string of pearls at her throat, stood like a statue caught in conflicting emotions. Her eyes were dry, not from coldness, but from a shock so profound it had yet to reach her tears. Her lips quivered, though she forced them still. She noticed Poirot's gaze and straightened. "Monsieur Poirot, my husband, he was well not moments ago. He went to speak with someone on the landing. I did not see who." Interesting, Poirot thought. Too specific to be vague, too vague to be specific. Next stood Graham Holt, Sir Alister's secretary, a young man with delicate spectacles and an ink stain on his sleeve. Pale as parchment, he wrung his hands nervously. I should have accompanied him," Holt stammered. "He dismissed me, said he needed privacy." Poirot noted the tremor in his voice, the darting of his eyes, the guilt lurking beneath every syllable. Perhaps real, perhaps performed. Finally, Dr. Rosalind Penford, the family's private physician, knelt beside the corpse. Unshaken, she examined Sir Alister's pupils. "He died instantly," she said with clinical detachment. "Neck broken. A fall would do that." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Would a fall, madame, also account for the bruising upon the right shoulder? A bruise shaped remarkably like a hand?" Dr. Penford stiffened. "It is possible he struck the railing on the way down." "Ah," Poirot said mildly, "but the bruise is not from wood, it is from fingers." Her eyes narrowed. Before the atmosphere could thicken further, the orchestra conductor stepped forward, trembling. "Monsieur Poirot!" There was a scream from upstairs before he fell. Poirot straightened. A scream! And who was nearest the landing at that moment? No one spoke. And then another sound rose, a shrill, piercing cry from the top of the stairs. A maid, pale as snow, staggered into view. There's something on the rail," she sobbed. Poirot and Inspector Bradbury rushed upward. Perched upon the balustrade was a scarlet ribbon tied into a neat bow. Bright, elegant, deliberate. Poirot gently plucked it free. "A token," he murmured. "A signature. Our murderer has a sense of drama." But before he could examine further, a second scream erupted from somewhere outside the manor. Guests spilled through the open terrace doors into the bitter cold. Snowflakes whipped in the wind, swirling in ghost-like eddies around marble pillars. There, slumped against a column, was Mr. Lionel Graves, Sir Alister's solicitor. His face had gone grey. His breath came in ragged gasps. He clutched his throat as though fighting for air. Poirot knelt, the snow soaking into the knees of his trousers. "Monsieur Graves," he said softly, "what has occurred?" Graves gasped. "A figure pushed me, nearly sent me over the guardrail." Inspector Bradbury scowled. "Another fall? Tonight?" Poirot's eyes swept the terrace. A lantern flickered above them, casting elongated shadows across the stonework. And on the ground near Graves's foot, something gleamed. Poirot delicately retrieved it using a handkerchief. A silver cufflink, engraved with an intricate serpent coiled around itself, its eyes tiny rubies. Poirot studied it with grave interest. "A serpent," he murmured, "symbol of the deceiver, or perhaps of betrayal." He slipped the cufflink into his coat pocket. Graves seemed ready to collapse entirely. Servants carried him inside, while guests buzzed with frantic speculation. Poirot raised a hand for calm. "Mesdames and messieurs," he said, "what we witnessed tonight is not the chaos of accident, but the choreography of a single mind, one who moves boldly even in full company. Such a killer is no amateur." His eyes travelled to the snow blanketing the terrace. Something caught his attention. Small footprints, delicate, narrow, almost slipper-like, trailed across the terrace and into the garden maze. The size of a woman's or a youth's. Poirot crouched and examined their depth. Not hurried, but purposeful. Light steps made by someone nimble. "Someone lightly attired," Poirot murmured. "Someone who should not be outdoors." Inspecting further, he noted that the wind had begun filling the prints with snow. "We must follow them," he said. Bradbury groaned. "Poirot, it's freezing." Poirot smiled. "Then let us walk briskly." They followed the trail into the twisted hedges of the garden maze. The further they went, the darker it grew, as though the night itself tried to swallow them. The footprints ended abruptly at a marble statue of Minerva, goddess of wisdom. Poirot examined the statue's base. There, placed carefully, was a second scarlet ribbon. Another bow, another taunt. He slipped it into his pocket beside the first and returned toward the manor, the storm intensifying behind them. Back inside, Poirot gathered everyone into the entrance hall. He scanned the room with narrowed eyes. "Where is Mademoiselle Clara Morningside?" he asked. All exchanged glances. Lady Evelyn answered stiffly. "My niece is unwell. She retired early." "But she was supposed to perform a violin solo tonight," Mr. Holt added uneasily. Poirot's eyes sharpened. A young woman missing ribbons tied as marks footprints of a small-size A-shadow on the landing. He sensed the threads beginning to twist together. A sudden pounding echoed on the main doors. A servant opened them. There stood Clara, soaked, pale, shivering, clutching something in her hand. A torn scrap of scarlet cloth. Her voice trembled. "Monsieur Poirot, you need to hear what I saw." Poirot inclined his head. "The night," he whispered, "grows intriguing." Chapter 2. Whispering guests and a second fright. The storm thickened around Ravencourt Manor, snow drifting in thick, spiralling sheets that erased the garden paths and blurred the edges of hedges and statuary. Within, the atmosphere had changed entirely. The chandeliers still glowed, the violins still rested silently upon their stands, but the air felt taut, like the moment before a bowstring snaps. Servants scurried about, whispering of omens and curses. Guests clustered together in hushed knots. their faces pale and uncertain. The sense of elegance from earlier in the evening was replaced by a brittle tension that made every small sound ring sharply. Poirot stood at the centre of the great hall. Like a stone in a river of anxious murmurs, his eyes moved constantly, studying the staircase, the gallery above, the terrace doors, each face in the crowd. The murder of Sir Alistair Morningside had not just shaken the household, it had unbalanced it, revealing cracks in its foundation he intended to illuminate fully. He addressed Inspector Bradbury, who was barking ineffective orders at confused servants. "Calm, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "A disordered mind will see only shadows." Bradbury glowered. "A man is dead, and another nearly so. I am not inclined toward your clever proverbs." Poirot only smiled gently. "Nevertheless, they are true." A sudden clamour rose from the terrace doors. Several guests hurried toward the sound, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Poirot's head turned sharply. There, another scream. He strode to the doors, Bradbury huffing behind him, and stepped onto the frost-slicked stone terrace. A frigid blast of air stung his cheeks. A small crowd had gathered around a marble column. There, slumped against its cold surface, was Mr. Lionel Graves, the solicitor. His evening coat was dusted with snow, his breath clouding in short, ragged bursts. "Stand back," Poirot commanded. He knelt beside the man and placed 2 careful fingers upon Graves's wrist. "His pulse is rapid," he said. "A great fright, perhaps even an attempt on his life." Graves's lips trembled. He came at me out of the dark," he rasped. "A figure masked in shadow. I felt hands shove me towards the balustrade. I nearly went over." Poirot exchanged a glance with Bradbury. "2 attacks in one evening," Bradbury muttered. "Either someone is staging chaos, or we have a madman." Poirot's gaze lifted toward the terrace railing. Snow clung to its ironwork like frost lace. A fall from that height onto the stone courtyard below would have been fatal. But something else caught Poirot's eye, a glint near Graves's shoe. A small silver object half buried in the snow. Poirot retrieved it delicately with his handkerchief. A cufflink, gleaming in the lantern light. Silver, engraved with a coiled serpent whose ruby eyes glinted like pinpricks of blood. "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "Our mysterious attacker leaves behind jewellery." Bradbury snatched it. "Or the victim dropped it." "Non," Poirot countered. "Its placement is too deliberate. It lies not behind him, where it might fall naturally, but ahead, where the attacker would stand." Bradbury frowned, but Poirot had already pocketed the evidence. The solicitor was carried inside by 2 footmen, leaving the terrace slowly filling with snow. Poirot remained momentarily, observing the darkness beyond the pillars. Footprints had begun to appear beneath the storm's accumulation. Small, delicate ones, like the imprints of a slipper rather than a boot. Poirot crouched. "Too small for a man," he murmured, "too lightly pressed for someone fleeing violently." Followed them only a few steps. But the storm was quick and greedy. The prints vanished into the white. Back inside, Poirot allowed his coat to be removed by a maid, whose hands shook so violently the buttons rattled. "What is happening to this house, monsieur?" she whispered. Poirot gave her a gentle nod. "Only what has been brewing for a long time, I fear." He returned to the great hall where the guests had assembled once more, huddled in tense conversation. The decorations of winter holly and glittering garlands now seemed garish against the backdrop of death. Poirot clapped his hands sharply. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "you must remain calm. The danger is real, yes, but it is controlled, so long as you follow instructions. Bradbury stepped forward. Everyone stay together. No wandering off. Poirot's attention moved to the small cluster of suspects near the staircase. Lady Evelyn Morningside, pale but composed, sipping brandy with trembling hands. Graham Holt, staring toward the terrace with eyes too wide for comfort. Dr. Rosalind Penford, standing rigidly, her fingers interlocked with clinical discipline. Poirot studied them. "Each of you had reason to be near Sir Alistair tonight," he said quietly, "and each of you has reacted in ways illuminating." Lady Evelyn flinched. "You imply that one of us—" "Imply?" Poirot raised a brow. "Madame, I imply nothing. I observe." Holt interjected shakily. "What about Graves? He was attacked too." "Precisely," Poirot said, "which suggests a pattern, or a misdirection." Dr. Penford stepped closer, her eyes cold. "Monsieur Poirot, you accuse us without evidence." Poirot lifted the cufflink slightly from his pocket. "On the contrary, I accumulate evidence." Penford's gaze flicked to the silver jewellery, though she said nothing. Before the tension could thicken further, a constable ran up breathlessly. "Sir, out on the terrace, fresh footprints leading away from the column." "Show me," Bradbury commanded. But Poirot lifted a hand. "No, they are already destroyed by the snow. I have seen enough." Bradbury looked irritated. "Poirot, you're insufferably cryptic." "Only when clarity must wait its turn," Poirot replied. Poirot paced slowly before the assembled household. The small footprints are made by someone lightly dressed, someone not wearing boots, someone who ventured outside without preparation. Lady Evelyn tensed. Dr. Penford's brow raised. Holt swallowed visibly. Poirot's gaze sharpened as he continued, "And only one among the immediate household is missing." Silence fell like a guillotine's blade. "Clara," Lady Evelyn whispered, "but she is unwell." Poirot tilted his head. "Is she, madame?" The great doors suddenly creaked open. A blast of snow blew in, and there she stood. Clara Morningside, drenched in melting frost, shivering violently, her hair tangled, her cheeks flushed with cold. In one trembling hand, she gripped a scrap of scarlet cloth, torn and frayed. Poirot stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "you have been outside?" Her teeth chattered as she nodded. Yes, I followed." She held out the scarlet scrap. "It was caught on the garden gate," she whispered. Poirot accepted it carefully. It matched perfectly the fabric of the ribbons. His voice softened but grew dangerously intent. "And what did you follow, mademoiselle?" Clara swallowed hard. "A shadow," she whispered. "A shadow near the staircase, right before Uncle Alistair fell." The hall erupted in whispers. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "The night," he said, "has begun to speak." And with Clara trembling before him, clutching the scarlet clue, Poirot knew this murder was no momentary act. It was a performance, and the killer had only just begun their show. Chapter 3. The Red Ribbon Trail. The scarlet scrap lay in Poirot's palm like a living ember, vivid, jarring, wholly out of place amid the muted hues of Ravencourt Manor. Around him, the guests murmured in mounting agitation as Clara Morningside swayed unsteadily, her soaked hair clinging to her cheeks, her breath white and shallow. Poirot guided her gently to a chair. "Mademoiselle, breathe, slowly. You are safe now." But Clara shook her head, fingers clenching the edge of her shawl. I am not certain safety exists in this house any more." Inspector Bradbury stepped forward. impatience evident in the stiff lines of his jaw. "You followed a shadow outside. That could mean anything. A trick of the storm, a manor servant even." "No," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "This figure moved with purpose, quickly but silently. And I recognized the scarf it wore, or thought I did." Poirot's brows rose. "A scarf. Describe it." "Long, red, the same shade as that ribbon scrap." She swallowed. "I saw a flash of it near the ballroom staircase, just before Uncle Alistair fell." The room held its breath. Poirot looked down at the torn ribbon fragment again. He had seen crimson fabric before tonight, in the hair ribbons adorning Clara's dress earlier in the evening. But hers had been whole, and this scrap was larger, coarser. A ribbon from a garment? A muffler? A costume? His gaze sharpened. Lady Evelyn stepped forward, worry etched across her pale face. "Clara, darling, why leave the house? Why wander into the storm?" "Because I heard something," Clara whispered. "A voice, calling, not loudly, but beckoning, like," she faltered, "like a tune I knew but couldn't place." Poirot leaned closer. "You followed the voice?" "Yes," she shuddered. "Then I saw the red scarf vanish through the terrace archway. So I followed it into the snow. I thought it would lead me to something." Bradbury muttered, "Or someone wanted you lured out there." Lady Evelyn gasped, "To hurt her?" Poirot's expression darkened. "Or perhaps to panic her, or to plant a false trail." He stood straightening the cuffs of his immaculate suit. But no attacker would leave such a clue without intention. The red fabric, like the silver cufflink, is a message. Dr. Rosalind Penford spoke up, arms crossed. A message from whom? A killer tossing trinkets behind him like breadcrumbs? It's theatrics. "Madam," Poirot said evenly, "what is murder, if not the theatre of human desperation?" Poirot moved toward the grand fireplace, holding the ribbon closer to the flames. The heat brought out faint discolorations along the frayed threads, dark spots barely visible. Ink, dye, or he touched a fingertip to one of the specks, observing how it darkened. "Blood," he murmured. The assembled guests recoiled. Clara's fingers flew to her mouth. "It wasn't mine. I didn't even notice." "I know, mademoiselle." Poirot gave her a reassuring nod. "This fragment was torn during a struggle." Bradbury frowned. "So the attacker fought with someone? Who?" "Perhaps Sir Alistair," Poirot said softly, "or perhaps Mr. Graves. But, in either case, the blood indicates violence." Graham Holt, nervous as a hunted animal, spoke for the first time in many minutes. "Then, we must assume the killer is still here among us." The silence that followed was cold as the storm outside. Poirot cleared his throat. "Let us not leap to conclusions. Instead, let us look again at the facts, we?" He paced slowly before the mantel. "Fact 1. Sir Alistair was pushed from the landing. Not a stumble, but a deliberate act." Murmurs. "Fact 2. Mr. Graves was nearly thrown from the terrace." More whispers. "Fact 3. Evidence is left behind at both scenes. A cufflink, and now this ribbon. 2 clues, 2 dramatic touches." Bradbury nodded grimly. "Which suggests the same person did both." "Or," Poirot corrected gently, "that someone wishes us to believe so." A stir passed through the hall. Poirot's eyes roamed the crowd again, pausing on 3 faces. Lady Evelyn, drained but her gaze unwavering. Dr. Penford, controlled, cool, a mask of logic shielding something taut beneath. Graham Holt, desperately trying to look anywhere except at Poirot. But his gaze did not stay there. It drifted to the musician's alcove, empty since the murder. Something tugged at his mind. "A moment!" Poirot said. He crossed to the alcove. The instruments rested quietly, undisturbed, except for a faint mark on the polished floor. A smear of snow, barely melted. Someone hid behind the curtains here, Poirot murmured. Bradbury frowned. How can you tell? Poirot pointed. Snow. Only a person coming directly from outside could leave such a trail. He glanced at Clara. Yet you were the only one we found outdoors. Clara trembled. You think I hid behind the curtains? Poirot shook his head. No, mademoiselle. The snow trail is older, half melted, half freshened. Someone entered before you ever stepped outside. The implications rippled through the room. So the killer came inside, Bradbury said slowly, then watched us from behind the curtains. Like a phantom of the theatre, Poirot murmured. At that moment, a footman burst into the hall. Inspector Bradbury, Monsieur Poirot, we've counted again. One guest cannot be found. Every head turned sharply. Bradbury stiffened. Who? The footman hesitated, pale. Mr. Jonathan Harrow, sir. A collective intake of breath. Harrow, the quiet historian, the bookish scholar who'd spent most of the night studying the manor's old portraits and tapestries. A man who seemed too timid to harm a fly. But now he was gone. Poirot closed his eyes for a brief moment, thinking. When was he last seen? The footman replied, shortly before the lightning cut the power. He said he was going to examine the old servant wing. He never returned. Bradbury swore under his breath. Damn fool! He's fled. That makes him guilty. Or frightened, Poirot corrected. Or in danger. Lady Evelyn wrung her hands. Could he be injured? Lost? Poirot turned toward the darkened corridor that led to the servant wing. A deep cold seemed to seep from it, as if the storm outside had slipped through its walls. He is not lost, Poirot said quietly. He is either hiding, or he has been silenced. Clara shivered violently. The hall's warmth seemed unable to touch her any more. Poirot placed a hand on her shoulder. Mademoiselle, your courage tonight has been exceptional. But tell me one more thing. Clara nodded weakly. You said you recognized the scarf the shadow figure wore. Why did it seem familiar? Her answer came reluctantly. Because I had seen it earlier, she whispered, in this house. Poirot's voice softened. On whom, mademoiselle? Clara's gaze drifted across the hall, towards someone Poirot had suspected from the beginning, and she whispered a single name. Everything in the room froze. Poirot inhaled sharply. At last, a thread had been pulled, a direction revealed, and the red ribbon in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. Deadlier. Chapter 4. Secrets of the Servant Wing. The storm's howl battered the manor as if angry fists beat against its stone walls. The lights flickered overhead, threatening another plunge into darkness. Poirot, ever precise, adjusted the lapels of his immaculate coat before turning toward the shadowed corridor that led to the abandoned servant wing. Behind him, the guests shifted uneasily. Clara Morningside kept her gaze fixed on the figure she had named, the one whose red scarf she claimed to recognize. Her lips trembled, yet she said no more. Poirot had gently pressed a finger to them. Patience, mademoiselle. A single accusation spoken too soon can destroy the symmetry of truth. But in his mind, the name echoed like a crack in glass. Dr. Rosalind Penford. The physician stood at the edge of the hall, spine rigid, jaw clenched. She betrayed nothing, not fear, not guilt, not concern, only a cold, professional stillness. Poirot did not confront her yet. There was a rhythm to unravelling lies, and one must not rush the delicate unfurling of deception. He motioned to Inspector Bradbury. "We go to the servant wing. Mr. Harrow may be there, or a clue to his fate." Bradbury snorted. "Or a murderer, perhaps," Poirot said lightly. "But do remember, murderers do not always hide in darkness. Many stand in lamplight with the confidence of the innocent." They stepped into the corridor. The air grew colder as they advanced, the walls narrowing, stripped of the grandeur of the main manor. Here the plaster cracked, and old gas sconce mounts clung stubbornly to the walls. Their footsteps echoed loudly, too loudly, as if the corridor resented intrusion. Bradbury swept his torch from side to side. "Damn place gives me chills. Why keep this wing sealed off?" Poirot's voice resounded softly. "Old families hide old stories, and where there are secrets, there are motives." A faint draught brushed past them. Poirot paused, running a hand along the wall. A nearly invisible seam. "A door," he murmured. Bradbury blinked. "Where? I see nothing." Poirot pushed lightly, and a panel shifted inward with a reluctant creak. Beyond lay a narrow stairway descending into darkness. The servant's back stair. "Mr. Harrow may have come this way," Poirot said. Bradbury scowled. "Or the killer dragged him." Poirot did not dismiss the possibility. They descended. At the bottom of the stairs lay a cramped room, long abandoned. Cobwebs hung like draperies, dust coated every surface like ash, except one. Poirot pointed. "Observe, someone touched this desk recently. The dust is disturbed." Bradbury knelt, inspecting. "Harrow's spectacles." He held them up, not broken though. Poirot examined the desk. Drawers slightly ajar. A faint indentation where a heavy leather-bound book once lay. He turned slowly, scanning the room. "What would interest a historian?" he murmured. Bradbury scratched his head. "Old family records, maps, diaries?" "Precisely." Poirot's eyes gleamed, and Sir Alistair possessed many such treasures. He pulled open a drawer and found a blank space amid otherwise untouched dust. Something was removed recently. "By Harrow?" Bradbury asked. "Or by the one who wished to prevent Harrow from reading it?" The air grew heavier. Then, a faint sound, a soft shuffle. Poirot raised a hand. Silence. Bradbury tightened his grip on his truncheon. Another shuffle. More insistent. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "From the corridor." They moved cautiously toward the doge sound. Poirot eased the door open, just a crack. A shape darted across the servant hallway. A man, thin, pale, wild with fear. Jonathan Harrow. "Stop!" Bradbury shouted, bolting forward. But Harrow fled, scrambling toward the far end of the corridor, stumbling through shadows like a frightened animal. Poirot followed with careful strides, not rushing. Panic was a poor guide, but clarity came in patterns. Harrow burst into a storage chamber, chest heaving. "Stay back!" he gasped. "I didn't kill him. I swear it." Poirot lifted his hands gently. "Monsieur Harrow, you must calm yourself. You are safe." "No one is safe here," Harrow cried. "I saw—" He choked. "I saw something. Something I shouldn't have." Bradbury closed the door behind them. "Out with it, man! What did you see?" Harrow trembled so violently he nearly collapsed. Poirot steadied him. "Begin at the beginning," Poirot said softly. Harrow swallowed. His voice came in a hoarse whisper. "I saw Sir Alistair arguing with someone in the gallery not an hour before he died." Poirot's breath stilled. "With whom?" he asked quietly. Harrow closed his eyes. "Dr. Penford." The revelation shook Bradbury. "The doctor! What were they arguing about?" "I don't know," Harrow said, voice breaking. "They spoke quietly, urgently, but Sir Alistair looked terrified." Poirot exchanged a glance with Bradbury. Harrow clutched his coat. "I went to the servant wing to find a ledger. A record Sir Alistair had kept of family medical histories. I thought perhaps it related to their argument. But when I returned to the gallery, the doctor was gone, and soon after, the power failed. Poirot exhaled slowly. A new piece clicked into place. Why flee, Monsieur Harrow? Harrow covered his face. Because I heard footsteps behind me. I felt watched, and the lightning, when it flashed, I saw a figure in a red scarf at the end of the hall. Bradbury stiffened. A scarf like the torn ribbon. Harrow nodded. Poirot grew still, and the figure, was it a woman? Harrow hesitated. I cannot be certain. Poirot paced slowly, fingers steepled. So, we have an argument with the victim, a missing medical ledger, a red scarf, a frightened historian, and a doctor with secrets. He turned sharply to Harrow. Monsieur, what became of the ledger? Harrow pointed shakily toward a corner of the room. I hid it there, beneath the floorboard. Bradbury hurried over. Prying up loose wood. A book lay beneath, leather-bound, old, heavy. Poirot lifted it reverently. The Morningside Family Medical Chronicle. A dangerous book for anyone wishing the past to stay buried. He opened the first page, and his heart tightened. Mon Dieu, he whispered. Bradbury leaned over his shoulder. What is it? Poirot closed the book with a soft but decisive snap. A motive, a powerful one. Ich stared toward the manor hall. For murder committed in cold blood. Poirot tucked the ledger under his arm. We return, he said quietly. The guests must hear a truth long hidden. Bradbury nodded grimly. Harrow sagged with relief. But as they stepped back into the corridor, lights flickering, a loud crash echoed through the manor. A scream followed, high, terrified, a woman's voice. Poirot's blood chilled. He knew that voice. Clara Morningside. Chapter 5. Footsteps in the Portrait Gallery. The storm had slackened to a cold drizzle by the time Poirot, Clara, and Inspector Bradbury stepped into the Portrait Gallery. A long, dim corridor where generations of Morningside ancestors glared down from their gilded frames. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, as if the eyes of the dead pressed too close. Bradbury raised his lantern. Servants say they heard footsteps here last night, long after the household had gone to sleep. Poirot clasped his hands neatly behind his back. Footsteps, oui, but not belonging to a ghost. Someone walked this gallery with purpose. He paused before a large portrait of Sir Edmund Clark, Alistair's father. The canvas had been recently dusted, strangely so, given most of the gallery bore a film of neglect. Clara swallowed. My uncle never cared for these portraits. He said the past was too heavy to drag along. Poirot leaned in, examining the frame. Yet someone cared enough to touch this one. He pointed to a faint smudge, fingerprints at the lower right corner. Bradbury frowned. A clue, or a signal, Poirot murmured. We shall see. Further down the gallery, a smaller portrait hung crookedly. Clara straightened it on instinct, but Poirot caught her wrist gently. Non, mademoiselle. Observe first, then touch. He knelt and inspected the wall behind it. A thin line of disturbed dust traced a vertical seam. A hidden panel, he announced softly. Bradbury knelt beside him. You think there's a compartment? I think, Poirot said, tapping the seam, that someone opened this recently. Last night, perhaps. Clara stepped back, anxiety tightening her breath. But why hide something here? And who would know about it except my uncle? Poirot did not answer immediately. He pressed on the panel. It resisted. He pressed again, more firmly this time. With a muted click, the panel swung outward, revealing a narrow recess. Inside rested a single object, a torn scrap of paper, crumpled and stained with rainwater. Bradbury retrieved it with tweezers. "Part of a letter." Clara leaned closer, reading the faded ink aloud. "Cannot keep her hidden forever. The truth will demand its—" Her voice faltered. Poirot finished the sentence quietly. "Price." Clara stepped back, trembling. Is it about me?" Poirot folded his hands. "It is a distinct possibility. Your uncle feared something, that much is certain." Bradbury exhaled sharply. "The missing ledger, the secret compartments, now this letter piece. Someone's been digging for years. Either Sir Alistair was hiding the truth, or someone else was trying to expose it." Poirot turned toward the end of the gallery, where the last portrait, a dark landscape, hung slightly askew. His eyes sharpened. "Inspector, mademoiselle, the storm last night did more than shake the windows. It disturbed someone who believed themselves unseen." He walked slowly toward the painting, because these footprints, barely visible on the rug, belonged to a man who was here after Sir Alistair died. Clara's breath hitched. "Another intruder?" Poirot nodded once, gravely. "Or," he said, "an accomplice." Chapter 6. The Key and the Keeper. A brittle wind swept through the open window of Sir Alistair's study as Poirot, Clara, and Bradbury re-entered the room. The storm had left the air sharp with the scent of wet stone, and the shadows clung to the corners like uneasy witnesses. Poirot moved directly to the desk, fingertips gliding over its polished surface. "In every mystery," he said softly, "there comes a moment when the keeper of secrets grows reckless. Last night was such a moment." Bradbury planted his hands on his hips. "We're still hunting for the missing ledger, and now some phantom intruder is skulking around the gallery." He shook his head. "I'm beginning to think this house breeds conspiracies." Clara approached the desk drawer, still open from the night of the murder. "I searched this room earlier," she murmured. "There's nothing my uncle hid that I haven't already looked for." Poirot's moustache twitched. "On the contrary, mademoiselle, you looked for what you expected to find. That is where many investigations falter." He tapped the underside of the drawer. Clara's eyes widened as he pressed a nearly invisible latch. A false bottom clicked loose, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside lay a tiny brass key, delicately engraved with the initials A.C. Bradbury whistled. "Another key? What does this one unlock?" Poirot lifted the key with a handkerchief, examining it thoughtfully. "Not a cabinet, not a drawer, something smaller, more personal." Clara frowned. "A jewellery box?" Poirot shook his head. "No, something your uncle would keep close but never wear." He crossed the room to the fireplace. Above it hung Sir Alistair's heavy mantel clock, an ornate bronze piece, long silent but still dignified. Poirot opened its back panel with a deft motion. Inside, gears sat untouched, but the inner wall bore a narrow slit, just wide enough for the brass key. Bradbury blinked. A safe inside a clock? Sir Alistair was a man of theatrics, Poirot said with a shrug, deadly theatrics. He inserted the key. A soft click echoed through the room, and a hidden compartment slid open. Clara gasped. Inside lay a folded document sealed, with red wax, and beneath it a small leather-bound diary. Poirot removed both items. "His personal diary," Clara whispered. "He never let anyone touch it." Bradbury leaned in. "Open it!" Poirot broke the wax seal of the document first. Clara craned her neck to read, her face drained of colour. "What is it?" Bradbury asked. Poirot answered for her. "A guardianship contract. Sir Alistair formally acknowledged Clara as his ward, but only under the condition that her true parentage remain concealed." Clara stared at the page, hands trembling. So he knew all along, and still lied to me. Poirot nodded, and someone feared this document would surface. He opened the diary next, flipping through pages filled with rigid handwriting. One entry stopped him cold. "Inspector," he said, voice low, "Sir Alistair wrote of a threat, someone demanding money in exchange for silence." Bradbury stiffened. "Blackmail?" Poirot closed the diary with a sombre hum. "Oui. And the last line reads, 'If he returns, I must protect Clara, whatever the cost.'" Clara's breath hitched. "He was trying to protect me." Poirot placed the diary gently on the desk. "Or," he said softly, "to protect himself from the truth." Chapter 7. Shadows on the Staircase. The Scarlet Staircase glowed faintly in the lantern light as Poirot, Clara, and Bradbury approached it. Its once opulent red runner, slightly frayed from years of use, seemed darker tonight, its hue deepened by the weight of secrets revealed. Clara hesitated at the base of the steps. "This is where my uncle was found. I haven't been able to walk up since." Poirot offered her a reassuring nod. "Courage, mademoiselle. The staircase remembers only what it sees, not what it means." Bradbury lit an additional lamp. "The servants claimed they heard voices here before Sir Alistair's fall. Given what we now know, someone confronted him." Poirot knelt, studying the lower steps. "Notice the scuff here. Recent, likely from a man's boot." He traced the mark with a gloved finger. "But what interests me more is the pattern of dust." "Dust!" Bradbury echoed, incredulous. Poirot gestured. "Observe, most of the steps show a uniform layer, but 2 are cleaner, as though someone stood there for some time." Clara stepped closer. "You mean someone waited for him? In the dark?" "Exactement." Poirot rose. "A confrontation took place, but not an impulsive one, planned." Bradbury scanned the balustrade. "We didn't find any weapon. Nothing to suggest he was pushed." Poirot pointed upward to the landing. "Not from here. Sir Alistair fell from there." Clara's breath caught. "That's where the last argument happened." Poirot turned to her sharply. "Ah, an argument? You did not mention this." Clara swallowed. "I wasn't hiding it. I just didn't think it mattered. I heard him speaking with someone the night before the murder." His voice was raised. He sounded frightened. "Whose voice?" Poirot pressed. I don't know." It was low, tense, a man's voice, but not one of the household staff. Poirot exchanged a swift look with Bradbury. "The blackmailer." Bradbury's eyes widened. "You think he confronted Sir Alistair on the landing?" Poirot nodded. "It fits. Sir Alistair refused payment or revelation. A struggle ensued. A man accustomed to fear might misstep." Clara's grip tightened on the staircase rail. So it wasn't murder. It was an accident. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Do not leap to conclusions, mademoiselle. The truth is rarely so simple." He continued up the staircase, pausing at the landing where Sir Alistair met his death. The banister here bore a faint crack, recently splintered. Bradbury crouched beside it, as though someone grabbed it too hard, or was pulled. Poirot nodded. "The second, I suspect." From his coat, he produced the torn letter retrieved from the portrait gallery. Sir Alistair's secrets were unravelling, and someone feared exposure. Clara whispered, "But who?" Poirot exhaled softly, his eyes drifting upward toward the shadowed upper floor. "The house holds 3 men capable of such desperation, yet only one knew every corner of this manor well enough to navigate it without light." Bradbury's jaw tightened. "You mean—" Poirot lifted a hand. "Patience, Inspector. The truth stands on the next flight of stairs." Chapter 8. The Silent Witness. The upper landing was narrower, quieter, a place where footsteps softened and whispers lingered longer than they should. Poirot reached it first, sweeping his lantern across the corridor that branched into the east and west wings. The shadows clung stubbornly to the walls, as though aware that discovery was near. Clara followed close behind, clutching the banister for support. I never came up here at night. My uncle said private rooms were off limits after dusk. Restrictions protect secrets, mademoiselle, Poirot replied, especially those a man is desperate to hide. Bradbury inspected the runner stretched along the hallway. The staff reports no one came up here after the murder, but these marks, he pointed to faint depressions in the carpet. Someone was pacing. Poirot crouched, studying them. Yes, a man of heavy build, nervous, troubled. He rose smoothly. But what interests me most is not the pacing. It is who witnessed it. Clara frowned. Witnessed, but there was no one here. Poirot pointed toward a small mounted fixture at the far end of the corridor. A decorative brass ventilation grate. The old English manor's design, he explained, often used vents to circulate warm air. This one leads directly above the servants' pantry. Bradbury's face brightened. So sound could travel through it? Perfectly, Poirot said, and someone below would have heard everything. Moments later, they descended to the servants' pantry, where a shy young maid named Edith waited anxiously by the doorway. Poirot approached her gently. Mademoiselle Edith, you told the housekeeper you heard voices the night Sir Alistair died. She nodded timidly. Yes, sir. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was polishing silver when I heard footsteps upstairs. Then, shouting. Clara stepped closer. Do you remember what was said? Edith wrung her hands. Not everything. But I heard Sir Alistair clearly. He was angry, terrified. He said, You will not take her from me. And the other man, he replied, She deserves the truth. Clara's breath trembled. Me, they were talking about me. Poirot rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. Courage, mademoiselle. We are close. Bradbury leaned forward. Did you recognize the second voice? Edith hesitated. Not exactly, but I've heard it before. Many times down here. Poirot nodded, as though expecting this. The pantry is near the cellar, yes? Yes, sir. Then the man was someone who frequented the lower floors. Someone who moved unseen by the family. Poirot's expression darkened. The assistant, Mr. Harrow, Clara gasped. Harrow! But he said he had only suspicions about me. He pretended to be trying to help. Poirot shook his head. Harrow coveted what he thought the ledger would reveal, and feared what Sir Alistair would confess. Edith looked frightened. There's more. After the argument, I heard something else. A thud, like someone stumbled, then footsteps running away. Poirot straightened slowly, his eyes sharpening. Et voilà, the silent witness speaks. Clara swallowed hard. So Harrow confronted him and fled after the fall. Poirot nodded, but, he added, voice low and deliberate, flight is not always proof of guilt, only of fear. He turned toward the dim corridor, leading back to the Scarlet Staircase. And now, mes amis, we confront the frightened man. Chapter 9. Harrow's Broken Alibi. They found Harrow in the dimly lit conservatory, hunched beside a dying fern, his hands trembling as he attempted to prune its browned leaves. The soft scrape of shears against brittle stems echoed through the glass chamber like a heartbeat out of rhythm. He looked up sharply when Bradbury strode in. Mr. Harrow, the inspector said, we need a word. Harrow's eyes darted between the three of them. Poirot calm, Clara pale but resolute, Bradbury towering with authority. "Inspector, is something wrong?" Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur, we have spoken to a witness who places you on the upper landing the night Sir Alistair died." Harrow froze. "That's impossible. I never went upstairs after dinner." Poirot tilted his head. "Your denial is swift, too swift for a man of innocence." He produced the torn scrap of letter from his coat. "You dropped this in the portrait gallery." Harrow squinted at it, then exhaled shakily. "Yes, I went there, but only to confirm my suspicions about Sir Alistair's dealings. I didn't harm him." Clara's voice wavered but held steady. "You argued with him the night before he died. The maid heard everything." Harrow's face drained of colour. "That wasn't an argument. It was desperation. I tried to convince him to tell you the truth." Poirot raised a brow. "The truth about her parentage? Or the truth about the funds you siphoned from the estate?" Harrow stiffened. "I didn't steal. Sir Alistair owed me money. Years of unpaid work. I asked for what was mine." Bradbury stepped closer. "You blackmailed him." Harrow's jaw clenched. "Call it what you like. I was cornered, and when I found out he planned to name a new heir, Clara, I panicked." Clara took a step back. "So you threatened him?" Harrow ran a shaking hand through his hair. "He refused to acknowledge his own lies. He said I was delusional, that I was nothing but a servant with misplaced ambition." His eyes glistened with frustrated tears. "But I never wanted him dead." Poirot observed him quietly, then spoke with surgical precision. "You confronted Sir Alistair on the landing." "Yes," Harrow whispered, "but it was only to demand the truth. He shoved me, told me to leave before he called the police. I grabbed the rail to steady myself, and he stumbled." Bradbury's voice hardened. "You expect us to believe it was an accident?" "It was an accident," Harrow cried. "He slipped. The landing carpet was loose. I told him it needed repairing." He pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. "When he fell, I froze. I thought no one would believe me, and when I saw the blood—" His voice broke. "I ran." The conservatory fell silent, except for the soft patter of rain against glass. Poirot approached him gently. "Monsieur Harrow, guilt and fear often embrace each other so tightly that even the man who feels them cannot tell them apart." Harrow looked up, eyes hollow. "Will you arrest me?" Bradbury hesitated, but Poirot answered first. "You will come with us," he said softly, "but whether you are a murderer or merely a desperate man caught in tragedy, that, Monsieur Harrow, is not yet decided." Clara's gaze lingered on Harrow, pity and dread mingling in her expression. For the first time, she understood. They were close, terribly close, and the final truth waited on the Scarlet Staircase itself. Chapter 10. The Last Step of Truth. The storm clouds finally parted the next morning, casting a muted gold light through the tall windows of Morningside Manor. The house was quiet, tired, as though exhausted from keeping its secrets for too long. Poirot stood alone at the base of the Scarlet Staircase, his fingertips resting lightly on the polished rail. The morning calm felt deceptive, like the pause before a final revelation. Bradbury arrived first. "Harrow's in holding," he reported. "He's sticking to his story. Accident, panic, nothing more." Poirot nodded. "Oui, because that part at least he believes." Clara descended the hall toward them, pale but composed. "Is it over?" she asked softly. "Has the truth been found?" Poirot turned toward her, his expression gentle. "Almost, but one final question remains. Why was Sir Alistair so terrified in his final days? His fear was not of Harrow, but of what Harrow might expose." Clara frowned. Expose about what? Your parentage, Poirot said, but not in the way you think. He motioned for them both to follow him up the staircase. They stopped at the landing, the place Sir Alistair had fallen. Poirot crouched and lifted the edge of the runner. Beneath it, the wood bore a deep groove, fresh, splintered. A struggle occurred, Poirot said quietly, but not solely between Harrow and Sir Alistair. A third presence disturbed this carpet some days earlier. Bradbury blinked. Someone else? Poirot nodded. Yes, someone who often walked these halls long after the family slept. Clara's breath caught. No, you don't mean Lady Evelyn, Poirot finished gently. Your uncle's wife. She knew the truth long before Harrow confronted him. Bradbury stiffened, but she said she knew nothing. Poirot's voice softened. A lie told out of fear and protection. She discovered Sir Alistair's guardianship document. She confronted him here. They argued. She pulled at his sleeve, begging him not to reveal the truth to you. Clara trembled. Why would she care? Poirot met her eyes. Because she feared losing everything. Sir Alistair planned to rewrite his will, naming you as sole heir. Lady Evelyn, already burdened by grief and years of coldness, saw her future slipping away. Clara shook her head in disbelief. She wouldn't. She's gentle, fragile. Desperation distorts character, Poirot said sadly. She panicked. Sir Alistair pulled away. The loose carpet snagged. He stumbled. She tried to catch him, but caught only his sleeve, and then he fell. Silence washed over the staircase. Bradbury exhaled slowly. So it was an accident, a tragic accident. Poirot nodded. Oui, but her silence afterward, born from terror, made the truth nearly unreachable. Footsteps echoed softly. Lady Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression resigned, shadowed by exhaustion. You knew, she whispered to Poirot. You knew from the moment you saw the torn sleeve. Poirot inclined his head. Your grief revealed itself in many ways. Lady Evelyn's voice trembled. I never meant to hurt him. Or Clara. Clara stepped forward, tears glinting. Why didn't you tell me? Because, Evelyn whispered, I feared you would hate me. Poirot placed a gentle hand on the banister. The truth is painful, madame, but it frees those who accept it. Clara hesitated, then moved to embrace Lady Evelyn, who broke into quiet sobs. Poirot turned away, allowing them their moment. His work was done. Bradbury sighed. You've untangled another impossible case. Poirot smiled faintly. No, Inspector. The truth untangled itself. I merely listened. Outside, the morning sun brightened, casting warm light over the Scarlet Staircase. No longer a monument to secrets, but a passage toward healing.